I'd taken one man from Nessa before. Why should this one be any different? The receptionist smiled politely before gesturing towards the private elevator. Mr. So will see you now. Of course he would. Men always thought they knew what they wanted. Until someone better walked in. The private elevator opened onto the executive floor. Glass, marble, silence, money. A world built for men like him. And women like me. His assistant led me to the enormous walnut doors and stepped aside. I smoothed my skirt, lifted my chin, and walked in. So Kwang-su looked up from his desk. Unreadable. Unbothered. As though I were no different from anyone else who walked through that door. You have 5 minutes. Perfect. I smiled. I think you'll find we have a great deal in. A soft click behind him. A door began to open. The whiskey had been sitting in front of me for almost 20 minutes. The ice had nearly melted. I hadn't touched it. O'Malley's had always been good for private conversations. Dark wood. Low lighting. Booths tucked away from everyone else. Normally, I appreciated that. Tonight, I barely noticed where I was. I kept seeing the engagement party. Not the speeches. Not the dancing. Not even Nessa. Him. Kwang-su. Standing beside her, as though he'd always belonged there. One hand resting lightly against the small of her back. Calm. Comfortable. Like the room revolved around him without him asking it to. When he'd looked at me, there'd been no challenge. No anger. No smug smile. Just certainty. As though I wasn't something he needed to worry about. I hated that more than I wanted to admit. It didn't make sense. 6 months ago, Nessa had been sleeping on Lisa's sofa. Crying over a relationship I'd walked away from. Now she was with one of the richest men in Atlanta. A man 10 years younger than her. A billionaire. How the hell did that happen? Cherry had spent the drive home trying to convince both of us it wouldn't last. It's a rebound. He'll get bored. Men like him don't marry women her age. I'd nodded. What else was I supposed to do? But I hadn't believed her. Not after the way he'd looked at Nessa. I'd seen men fake affection before. Hell, I'd probably done it myself. That wasn't what I'd seen that night. I wrapped my hand around the glass. The whiskey was watered down now. I drank it anyway. Atlanta isn't that big. Not if you spend enough time around business people. Developers know investors. Investors know lawyers. Lawyers know everyone. A billionaire doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Yet somehow, I'd never heard of Kwang-su until the engagement party. That bothered me. More than it should have. I checked my watch. 7:43. Darius was late. Not unusual. He'd spent over 20 years with Atlanta PD before retiring and becoming a private investigator a couple of years ago. If anyone could tell me who Kwang-su really was, it was him. A shadow fell across the table. You look like hell. I looked up. Darius shrugged off his leather jacket before dropping into the booth opposite me. Nice to see you too. I'm serious. You usually are. The waitress appeared beside the table. The usual, Darius? He smiled. Please. She disappeared again. He looked back at me. All right. What's going on? I reached for my whiskey. Have you ever heard of a company called Securinth? For the briefest moment, something changed. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. He frowned. Why? I've been trying to find out about the CEO. He didn't interrupt. But nobody seems to know anything. The 1 or 2 people in my circle who've even heard of the company all said the same thing. They know he's Korean because of his name. They know Securinth. They don't know him. Darius studied me for a moment. How did you come across him? He was at Eric's engagement party. The one on Saturday? I nodded. Cherry recognized him. Apparently she'd seen him months ago at some charity benefit. He made a huge donation. Then left before anyone even realized he was there. Darius remained quiet. She hasn't been herself since the engagement party. He raised an eyebrow. How's Cherry? I gave a humorless laugh. We're taking a break. His eyebrows climbed a little higher. A break. Her idea. What happened? I swirled the melting ice around my glass. She said she needs to clear her head. Said she didn't know where she stood anymore. I still don't know what that means. Darius gave a small nod, but didn't comment. I leaned forward slightly. Anyway. Do you know how I could meet this Kwang-su? He looked around the bar before lowering his voice. Firstly, you might want to lower yours. I frowned. What? I'm serious. I glanced around instinctively. Nobody was paying us the slightest bit of attention. When I looked back, Darius's expression hadn't changed. I'm not sure why you want to meet him. But trust me, it's a bad idea. I laughed once. You're making him sound like the boogeyman. I'm doing no such thing. He folded his hands together on the table. If things ever went south between you and him, you're on your own. No one's coming to help. I stared at him. What do you mean? He held my gaze for several seconds. Leave him alone. And he'll leave you alone. Why? He exhaled slowly. I'll tell you a story. But I'm only telling you because you're family. I nodded. About 3 years ago. I was still with Atlanta PD. A corporate client filed a complaint against Securinth. They claimed the company hadn't delivered what they'd been paid to do. Securinth asked for a quiet resolution. The client refused. A young assistant district attorney saw an opportunity to make a name for himself. He convinced enough people that something about Securinth didn't add up. So they pushed. They wanted hearings. Investigations. The works. He paused as the waitress returned with his drink. He waited until she'd walked away before continuing. And then? People's lives started falling apart. I frowned. What do you mean? The client. The client's chief financial officer. A city councilor who'd publicly supported the case. One detective. Eventually, even the judge. I blinked. What happened? Embarrassing things started becoming public. Affairs. Expense fraud. Questionable overtime claims. Conflicts of interest. Nothing criminal enough to send anyone to prison. But enough to destroy reputations. I stared at him. You're saying Securinth did that? He shook his head immediately. I'm saying nobody ever proved Securinth did anything. To this day, no one knows where the information came from. And eventually, the evidence showed the client had been in the wrong all along. The case collapsed. After that, he took a sip of his beer. People got the message. I found myself leaning in. What message? Stay out of Securinth's business. And they'll stay out of yours. Silence settled between us. Finally I spoke. So everyone just accepted that? He shrugged. What exactly was there to investigate? They hadn't broken any laws. They were just a very private company. The whole thing started because people convinced themselves being secretive meant they had something to hide. They pushed. They lost. And after that, no one saw any point poking the bear again. He looked me straight in the eye. So whatever your problem with this Kwang-su is, my advice, forget it. I looked down at my glass. He was at Eric's engagement party. With Nessa. For the first time that evening. Darius smiled. Well. Firstly, good for Nessa. I looked up. He wasn't joking. Sounds like she landed a big one. I shook my head. You don't understand. No. I don't think you do. He leaned back in his chair. I remember you telling me you'd upgraded. Younger. More exciting. He smiled to himself. Now your ex has turned up with a younger billionaire. He took another sip of his drink. If I'm being completely honest. Looks like she upgraded too. I stared at him. You really know how to make a man feel better. I'm your cousin. It's practically my job. I couldn't help letting out a small laugh despite myself. It didn't last. I still can't get my head around it. I've spent years moving in circles with some of the wealthiest people in the city. I've never heard his name. Not once. He is so much younger than me. How does someone like that end up with that kind of influence? Darius shrugged. Some people just have it. I frowned. I don't think anyone in my circle even knows who he is. He gave a quiet laugh. Oh. They know. They just don't talk about him. Why not? Because those who know. No. He finished his drink before standing. And because we're blood. I'm going to give you the best advice you'll get. He picked up his jacket. Forget him. Forget Securinth. And move on with your life. I watched him leave. Then I looked back down at the whiskey I'd barely touched. For some reason, I already knew I wasn't going to take his advice. I woke to an empty bed once again. That wasn't unusual anymore. The vast, silk sheets were cold on his side. The first few times I'd woken up alone in his massive master bedroom, a sharp spike of anxiety had hit my chest, a leftover reflex from years of feeling discarded. Now I simply stretched, buried my face in his pillow, and inhaled the lingering, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and rain. I smiled. The sleek digital clock on the marble nightstand read 7:18 a.m., which meant Kwang-su had already been awake for well over 2 hours. When he'd first casually mentioned weeks ago that he rose at 5 every morning for 2 hours of brutal judo training, I'd assumed he was exaggerating. He wasn't. 5 o'clock. Every single morning. 2 hours of intense, disciplined conditioning. A scalding shower. Breakfast. Then running a multi-billion-dollar security firm. He spoke about it with the same flat, matter-of-fact tone one might use to describe making tea. I still thought he was wildly, unhinged level insane. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, pulling one of his heavy gray cotton t-shirts over my head. It hung loosely past my thighs, bare skin underneath, the soft fabric smelling deliciously like him. Barefoot, I padded down the long, quiet hallway toward the kitchen. The rich, dark aroma of brewing espresso reached my nose before I even rounded the corner. Kwang-su was standing at the massive marble island. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, curling slightly at his nape. He wore a fitted black henley, the sleeves pushed high over his heavy, vascular forearms, reading a financial report on his tablet while eggs quietly sizzled in a cast-iron pan. Without looking up from the screen, his deep voice broke the quiet room. "Good morning." I paused, leaning against the doorframe, a small smile curving my lips. "How do you always know I'm awake? You didn't even hear my footsteps." "You stopped snoring," he murmured, his voice smooth and deadpan. I stared at him, crossing my arms over my chest. "I do not snore." He looked up then, his dark, heavy eyes locking onto mine. The corner of his sharp mouth lifted ever so slightly in a rare, dangerous half-smile. "So I've been told." I narrowed my eyes, stepping closer. "You've been told by who?" "You." "When?" "About 30 seconds after I suggested you might snore." I tilted my head, studying his completely serious face. "I don't remember that conversation." "I know," he said, turning back to the pan, expertly sliding the eggs off the heat. "You were fast asleep." A helpless, breathless laugh escaped me. "You are utterly impossible." "So I've been told." I walked straight up behind him, stepping right into his personal space, and wrapped my arms loosely around his solid waist. I pressed my cheek against the broad, warm expanse of his back, feeling the hard, dense muscle beneath his shirt. He leaned back against me effortlessly, shifting his weight as naturally as if we had been waking up together for a decade. No hesitation. No posturing. Just absolute, seamless comfort. "What time did you finish training today?" I murmured into his shoulder blade, enjoying the sheer heat radiating off him. 7. "You've been awake for over 2 hours while I was sound asleep." "I hate you." "I know. You don't even sound slightly sorry." "I'm not," he said, turning around within the circle of my arms. His large hands immediately settled on my hips, his long fingers pressing lightly into my skin through the thin cotton of his t-shirt. His dark gaze dropped over my face, lingering on my lips. I laughed, looking up into his dark eyes. "I was really hoping that wasn't your answer." "I know," he repeated quietly, his thumb tracing a slow, burning arc over the curve of my hip bone. A comfortable, heavy silence settled between us as he turned back to plate our breakfast. I stepped away, reaching into one of the high darkwood cupboards without a second thought. Halfway through grabbing 2 ceramic mugs, my hand froze. I blinked, staring at the shelf. I frowned. "When did you move the artisan roast?" "I didn't." I looked again. It was resting right next to the dark roast, exactly where it had been yesterday. "Oh." Kwang-su glanced over at me, holding 2 porcelain plates. "What?" "I didn't even have to look," I said softly, almost to myself. "I just reached in and knew where it was." "Yes. I've only been coming here for a few months." "I shouldn't instinctively know where everything in your kitchen leaves." He set a plate down in front of my stool before setting down his own. Then, leaning his broad hands against the marble counter, he looked at me with absolute, unwavering seriousness. "I've noticed something, Nessa." I took my seat, looking up at him curiously. "What?" "You currently have more clothes in this apartment than I do." I blinked. Then, a loud laugh burst out of my throat. "I absolutely do not." "You do," he stated smoothly, pulling out his chair. "I don't." "You have occupied an entire wardrobe in the main closet." "I have not." "You have also annexed 2 entire dresser drawers." "I needed those for delicates," I countered. "My top bathroom shelf is covered in small bottles," he continued, completely unbothered. "I moisturize, Kwang-su. It's called skincare." "And the walk-in closet in the guest suite?" I pointed my fork at him defensively. That's seasonal storage. It was, he noted dryly, taking a slow sip of his black coffee. It no longer appears to be. I shook my head, fighting back a wide, helpless smile. You've been keeping an exact physical tally. I work in risk assessment and intelligence, he murmured, his dark eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. I notice inventory. You're impossible. So I've been told. I hid my smile behind my coffee mug, taking a warm sip. The ridiculous, beautiful thing was, he wasn't wrong. Somewhere between leaving a spare toothbrush in his glass holder, forgetting a silk blouse on a hanger, and deciding it was infinitely easier to keep 3 work dresses hung up in his closet, my life had quietly, irreversibly woven itself into his. Neither of us had sat down to make a grand declaration about moving in. Neither of us had negotiated space. It had simply happened. And as I looked across the island at this powerful, terrifyingly attractive man quietly eating breakfast beside me, I realized something that made my heart do a sudden, heavy thud against my ribs. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Mondays rarely surprised me. I preferred it that way. By 8:30 I was already halfway through the morning briefing with Tom as we walked towards my office. He matched my pace effortlessly, tablet in hand. 9 o'clock is the executive strategy meeting. I nodded once. 10:30, video conference with Singapore. The legal team have approved the revised documentation. Good. The Berlin proposal is ready for your signature. Leave it on my desk. He made a note without breaking stride. There is one additional request. I continued reading the report on my tablet. A Miss Cherry Barnes has requested a meeting. My attention remained on the screen. I'm sorry. Who? Cherry Barnes. Nothing. The name meant absolutely nothing. Tom glanced down at his notes. She said you met briefly at a charity gala last year. Still nothing. She also mentioned the Carrington and Matthews engagement party. Recognition arrived. Barely. No. He looked at me. I'm sorry. No. We reached my office. He opened the door as I walked inside. I assume that's your response to the meeting request. Yes. He nodded. I'll decline it. I placed my tablet on the desk before picking up the next report. Then, almost as an afterthought, I said, if she calls again, I'm unavailable. Tom's fingers paused above his tablet. For how long, sir? I looked up for the first time that morning. The next 100 years should do. He considered that for precisely half a second. Very good, sir. He made a note. I had no doubt he would write those exact words. Then he continued the briefing, as though we'd never been interrupted. By the time I returned to the penthouse that evening, the heavy stress of the day evaporated the second the private elevator doors slid open. Nessa was already there. I found her curled up in the corner of the sofa, wearing one of my hoodies, her feet tucked beneath her, completely absorbed in a home renovation program. She didn't even notice me come in. Apparently deciding whether someone should choose quartz or marble countertops was far more important. I quietly loosened my tie. Nothing. I slipped off my shoes. Still nothing. Only when I sat beside her did she finally look up. Oh. She smiled. You're home. I am. She leaned over, kissed me once, then immediately looked back at the television. They've knocked down the wrong wall. I looked at the screen. I see. They've ruined the kitchen. They appear to have. It's tragic. I can tell. She nodded solemnly. It really is. I watched the program for another 30 seconds. I have no idea what's happening. I know. But now you're invested. I don't believe I am. You will be. She took another sip of her tea. They always regret the open plan layout. I'll take your word for it. She smiled to herself. I wasn't entirely convinced she'd heard anything I'd said. The program finally ended. She reached for the remote. Your turn. I don't mind. You watched an hour of kitchen disasters. You seemed happy. I was. That answer alone made it worthwhile. The room settled into its usual comfortable silence. It occurred to me that somewhere over the last few months, silence had stopped feeling like something that needed filling. Eventually I looked around the apartment. Then back at her. This already feels like home. She looked up. What? This. I gestured vaguely around us. You. The terrible television. The tea I never seem to drink because you steal it. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I don't steal it. You do. I borrow it. Indefinitely. Exactly. She laughed quietly. I waited until she stopped. Would you like to make it official? The smile faded. Not because she was unhappy. Because she'd understood exactly what I meant. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Kwang-su. You don't have to answer now. She was quiet for several seconds. When Donald left, she stared down into her tea. I promised myself something. I said nothing. I told myself I would never move in with someone again. Not unless. She shook her head gently. I don't know. I can't explain it. I gave 10 years of my life to someone. I built my whole world around him. When it ended, it felt like I'd lost my home as well. She looked up at me. I know you're not Donald. I've never once thought you were. But every time I think about moving in, I hear myself making that promise. Silence settled between us. I reached across the sofa and took her hand. Then we'll wait. She blinked. That's it. I nodded. We'll wait. No deadline. No convincing. No. What if it takes months? Then it takes months. She searched my face as though expecting there to be more. There wasn't. Because there didn't need to be. After a moment, she smiled. Not because she'd changed her mind. Because she realized she didn't have to. She squeezed my hand once. Then rested her head against my shoulder. The conversation was over. And somehow, that was enough. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the question of moving in, but the answer. Or rather, how easily, how completely he had accepted it. I'd spent so much of my adult life bracing myself for disappointment, preparing for the fallout, the cold shoulder, the subtle emotional tax that always followed whenever I set a boundary. I had forgotten that saying no didn't have to come with a penalty. With Donald, disappointment had always come wrapped in a suffocating layer of guilt. If I didn't want to attend a dinner with his friends, he wouldn't yell. He'd just sigh. Not dramatically, but a heavy, disappointed exhale. Just enough to make me spend the next 3 hours agonizing over whether I had ruined his entire night. If I wanted a quiet weekend to myself, he'd smile, tilting his head with pity, and softly ask if everything was all right. If I was changing, if I still loved him. Nothing was ever an overt argument. It was a slow, crushing wait. 1,000 tiny, passive-aggressive moments that somehow always ended with me apologizing. Even when I had done absolutely nothing wrong. I had become so conditioned to managing someone else's fragile ego that I'd stopped noticing I was doing it. Tonight, I had told Kwang-su I wasn't ready to move into his penthouse. I had braced myself for the sharp probing questions, the smooth reassurance, the subtle negotiation, perhaps even a hint of a bruised ego. Instead, he had simply looked at me with those dark, unblinking eyes and said, "Then we'll wait." That was it. No smooth persuasion. No brooding sulk. No silent treatment to make me feel as though I had let him down. He had accepted my answer simply because it was my answer. For the very first time, I truly understood the profound difference between patience and control. One gave you real space to breathe. The other simply manipulated you into believing the decision had been yours all along. I had never realized how often I'd confused the two. Later that night, the sprawling apartment fell into a warm, heavy quiet. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling glass, a soft late-night rain tapped rhythmically against the windows, washing the city lights into blurred strokes of gold and amber. I lay flush against Kwang-su's side, my head resting comfortably on his chest, my hand tracing slow, lazy circles across the hard, warm expanse of his chest, while he skimmed through a report on his tablet. Eventually, he set the screen down on the marble nightstand, his dark gaze turning down toward me. I smiled, my fingers lingering against his ribs. "What?" "You keep looking at me," he murmured, his deep voice carrying that low, rumbling resonance I felt straight through his chest. "I am." "Why?" "I enjoy it." A breathless laugh escaped me. "That's a terrible answer, isn't it?" "I know," he said softly, a faint curve touching his lips. His large hand drifted absent-mindedly down across my waist, his warm palm sweeping over the curve of my hip before his thumb settled low on my abdomen. His calloused skin stroked the smooth, rich surface of my body in slow, reverent arcs. He fell quiet for a long moment, his thumb lingering against a small, faint line etched low into my skin. "Can I ask you something?" he murmured. I tilted my head, looking up into his dark, intense eyes. "Of course." His thumb remained resting lightly against the raised mark just above my bikini line. "I've wanted to ask about this for a while. How did you get it?" I looked down at his hand resting against my stomach, hovering right over the scar. "Oh, I suppose I never told you." He didn't rush me. He simply waited, his palm flat and warm against my lower belly. "Years ago, I used to dread talking about it. I used to feel defective, damaged, like a broken vessel. Now, it was simply a part of my story. I had surgery," I whispered into the quiet room. "What for?" "Fibroids." Kwang-su nodded once, his expression solemn and attentive. He wasn't interrupting. He was absorbing every word. "They had been causing horrible issues for years," I explained softly, tracing the seam of the duvet. "The pain, the ridiculous, agonizing periods. I kept pretending it was normal, that every woman dealt with that kind of agony. It wasn't." A small, self-deprecating smile touched my face. I eventually had them removed. His thumb gently brushed over the scar again, a light, protective caress. "Does it still hurt?" "No," I breathed, looking up into his eyes. "Not anymore." A heavy silence settled between us, filled only with the soft pitter-patter of rain against the glass. I wasn't entirely sure why I kept talking, or why the words began spilling out of me. Perhaps because he'd never once made me feel like I had to protect him from uncomfortable conversations. "The strange thing is," I murmured, shifting my gaze to the dark ceiling. "Honestly, the surgery and the scar were probably the easiest part." He didn't speak. He just waited, his grip on my waist tightening ever so slightly, anchoring me to him. "I've had irregular cycles for as long as I can remember," I confessed, my voice dropping to a raw whisper. "A long time ago, my doctor sat me down and told me there was a strong chance I might struggle to conceive. She couldn't say for certain, but she wanted me to be realistic. Prepared." I let out a shaky, quiet breath, feeling a familiar tightness in my throat. I remember driving home from the clinic that afternoon. I pulled into a parking lot and just sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't even sure if I wanted children back then. But hearing a medical professional tell you that the choice might not be yours to make anymore. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. Somewhere along the way, I just stopped believing I'd ever be anybody's mother. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Saying them out loud surprised even me. I think that was one of the secret reasons I stayed with Donald for 10 years. I admitted, the ugly truth floating to the surface. He already had his children from his previous marriage. There was never any pressure on me. Never any expectation that I would give him a family or build a nursery. So I convinced myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself I was fine with it. I forced a faint, fragile smile. It was so much easier than admitting how deeply it hurt. The bedroom became painfully still. I braced myself. I waited for the usual platitudes, for him to tell me doctors make mistakes, to cite medical miracles, to throw out hope, statistics, or awkward comfort to fix the mood. Instead, Kwang-su shifted his large frame, sliding down the mattress. Without saying a single word, he lowered his head and pressed his lips gently against the faint scar on my lower abdomen. A soft, lingering, reverent kiss. Just once. As though that small mark of pain deserved tenderness, devotion, and respect, instead of pity or medical analysis. My eyes stung before I even realized I was crying. Warm tears silently spilled down my cheeks, soaking into the pillow. He didn't offer empty promises that everything would turn out all right. He didn't promise we would magically have a house full of children one day. He didn't pretend to know answers that neither of us could possibly possess. He simply pulled his broad body back up, wrapped his heavy, powerful arms around me, and pulled me flush against his chest, holding me so tightly I could feel the steady, reassuring thud of his heart against my cheek. And somehow, in the quiet darkness of his room, that wordless devotion meant more than any speech ever could. 3 months ago, stepping through the towering glass doors of Securinth's corporate headquarters had been downright terrifying. I had felt small, intimidated, and out of my depth. Now, the sharp receptionist looked up from his console as I approached, his face softening into a warm, genuine smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Price." "Good afternoon, Ethan." I believe Mr. So is just wrapping up a high-level call on line 1, he offered smoothly. I don't mind waiting. He nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. I'm sure he'll be very pleased to see you. A quiet smile touched my lips as I smoothed the front of my tailored skirt. He usually is. The first phase of the massive Securinth redevelopment project had officially closed out that morning. The wrap-up meeting had dragged on for nearly 2 agonizing hours. Design revisions, final sign-offs, risk assessments, and lessons learned. The exact kind of exhaustive corporate meeting that easily could have been an email if everyone involved weren't utterly convinced they enjoyed the sound of their own voice. I was exhausted down to my bones. But I was fiercely proud. It had gone spectacularly well. The private elevator doors chimed and slid open onto the executive floor. Unlike the bustling reception area downstairs, this level was hushed, almost solemn. Executives and aides moved with quiet, focused purpose. Telephones rarely rang out loud. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised their voice. The entire floor was a direct physical reflection of the man who ran the empire. Calm, powerful, unshakable. Tom looked up from his triple monitor setup as my heels clicked softly across the polished floor. Good afternoon, Miss Price. Hi, Tom. He literally just hung up. Tom gestured toward the heavy double doors. Go straight on in. Thank you. I gave a light, double knock before pushing the heavy oak door open. Kwang-su was leaning over his massive dark desk, reviewing a financial dossier. The moment his dark eyes flicked up and caught mine, the cold, formidable CEO completely vanished. His sharp, sculpted features softened into an expression of pure, unadulterated relief. There you are, his deep voice rumbled through the quiet office. I smiled, stepping inside as the heavy door clicked shut behind me. There I am. You survived. Barely, I groaned. I heard Martin attempted another 30-minute closing speech. It was 42 minutes, Kwang-su. 42. He winced sympathetically, a rare, relaxed warmth breaking across his face. My sincere condolences. I accepted my own condolences about 20 minutes into his presentation. He pushed away from his desk, rounding the corner with long, effortless strides. So, how did completing Phase 1 feel? Good, I admitted, looking up at him as he closed the distance between us. Really, really good. Worth celebrating? I definitely think so. I agree, he murmured, stopping directly in front of me. His tall frame towered over mine, blocking out the rest of the room. You did incredible work, Nessa. Your team blew the board away. Our team? I corrected softly, feeling a pleasant, radiating heat bloom across my face. I know, he said softly. Without warning, his large, warm hand slipped around my waist, his long fingers spanning my hip, pulling my body firmly against his tailored suit. So? He whispered, his dark eyes dropping down to my mouth. Congratulations. Before I could offer a witty reply, he lowered his head and kissed me. It was soft, slow, and devastatingly deep, the kind of kiss that instantly wiped every thought of floor plans and client meetings straight from my brain. My hands automatically came up to rest against the lapels of his suit jacket. When he leaned back just an inch, only to capture my lower lip in a second, lingering kiss that sent a wave of liquid heat straight down my spine, a breathless laugh escaped me against his mouth. Kwang-su. He hummed, his lips brushing mine as he spoke. You're at work. I am. I glanced nervously around his massive glass-walled office, the city skyline spread out far below. I finished my work for the day. I haven't. I finished talking business. He let out a low chuckle, his thumb tracing a heavy circle against my waist through my dress. So have I? Someone could literally walk through those doors, I protested, though my hands had subtly slipped up toward his broad shoulders. They won't. You sound entirely too confident. I am. He lowered his head again, pressing a warm, lingering kiss against my forehead, his breath hot against my skin. You've been working too hard lately. So have you. I know. I rested my palms flat against his firm chest, feeling the steady, strong thud of his heart beneath the fine wool. I only stepped up here to say a quick hello. I'm very pleased you did. His expression was so openly, unabashedly happy to have me in his arms that it made my heart flutter wildly. You really missed me today, didn't you? I teased softly. I did. Kwang-su, I saw you at the briefing less than 2 hours ago. It felt significantly longer. I rolled my eyes, a helpless smile breaking across my face. You are completely impossible. So I've been told, he murmured, his dark eyes darkening as he dipped his head down, clearly intending to take my mouth again. I raised one manicured finger, pressing it gently against his warm lips. No, he stilled, his dark brows lifting. No? We are standing in the middle of your corporate office, I pointed out. I have boundaries. Kwang-su paused, looking thoughtfully around his pristine, minimalist office. I see your concern. I knew you'd see reason. For a second, he appeared to consider the logistical problem with total, executive seriousness. Then, keeping one hand wrapped securely around my waist, he reached over with his free hand to a subtle, invisible latch seamlessly built into the dark wood paneling beside his bookshelf. With a quiet click, a section of the wall swung silently inward. My jaw nearly dropped. I've been in this office 20 times, and I've never noticed that door. Most people don't, he said smoothly, pushing the hidden door fully open. Beyond the threshold lay an expansive, private luxury suite, furnished with a king-sized plush bed, dark silk linens, a leather seating area, a walk-in wardrobe, and an ensuite bathroom, all finished with the exact same understated, dark elegance as the rest of his empire. I stared at the bedroom, then back up at his handsome face. You have a hidden bedroom? Inside your corner office? When work runs until 3 in the morning, it can be a very long drive back to the penthouse, he explained smoothly. I shook my head, fighting back a laugh. You are completely unbelievable. It has proved to be exceptionally useful. I can only imagine. A dark, delicious glint entered his eyes. Does this address your privacy concern? I folded my arms over my chest, trying desperately to maintain a stern expression. My concern was someone walking in on us. Nobody walks in here, he murmured, stepping closer, his heavy shadow swallowing me whole. Only me. And you. You've thought this whole thing through, haven't you? I had approximately 7 seconds to formulate a strategy, he admitted softly, taking my wrist and gently uncurling my fingers to laces through mine. I shook my head, a breathless laugh escaping me. I refused to enable this behavior. Kwang-su pulled me closer, bringing my hand to his lips and pressing a slow, burning kiss against my knuckles, his eyes locked onto mine. Come and say hello properly, Nessa. The raw, heavy possessiveness in his gaze made my stomach flip in the absolute best way possible. His eyes were dark, warm, and entirely too persuasive. I let out a long, dramatic sigh. I am beginning to realize you are a terrible, terrible influence on my professional ethics. So I've been told, he whispered against my skin. Still smiling, my pulse hammering against my ribs, I let him take my hand. And together, we stepped into the private darkness behind the hidden door, letting the heavy wall slide quietly shut behind us. He was never supposed to end up with her. Every single time my mind drifted back to that disastrous engagement party, a sharp, bitter rage surged straight through my veins. Nessa. Sweet, boring, plain Nessa. Approaching 40, with nothing to show for her life except a decade, spent quietly fading into the background while Donald worked himself to the bone. She should have been pathetically grateful that anyone even looked her way after Donald dumped her. She was supposed to fade away gracefully like every other discarded ex. Instead, somehow, she had managed to sink her claws into the youngest, most elusive billionaire in Atlanta. It made 0 sense. It was a statistical impossibility. If anyone in this city actually suited a powerful, high-status man like Kwang-su, it was me. We were closer in age. I understood how to move in wealthy circles. I knew how to look expensive, how to stroke a powerful man's ego, how to play the game. And besides, I had met him first. Well, technically, he had seen me first. Last year, at the Children's Hospital charity benefit, I'd noticed him the exact second he walked into the grand ballroom. Every woman in the room with an ounce of taste had. He was devastatingly handsome, draped in an expensive suit, looking entirely unbothered by the wealth hovering around him. He had written a massive 7-figure donation check, offered a cool, polite smile to the board, and vanished into his private motorcade before half the socialites in the room even realized he'd been there. Men like Kwang-su didn't go unnoticed. Not by ambitious women. And certainly not by me. Maybe I'd simply approached him at the wrong time that night. After all, Donald had once looked completely devoted to Nessa too. He had sworn up and down that she was his soulmate. In the end, he'd still chosen me. People loved to pretend love was some eternal, unbreakable vow. It wasn't. It was about options. Sometimes, a far superior option simply came along. And if I had easily managed to turn Donald's head and rip him away from a 10-year relationship, why on earth couldn't I turn Kwang-su's? I paused outside the Securinth corporate tower, catching my reflection in the dark glass doors. A tailored cream silk blouse that showed just enough skin, a tight cream mini pencil skirt hugging my hips, 3-inch designer heels, hair freshly blown out into soft, golden waves. Just enough gold jewelry to look high maintenance and expensive. Confident. Elegant. Irresistible. I smoothed my skirt and smiled at my reflection. There was absolutely no reason this couldn't work. Men like Kwang-su were used to women bowing down to them. They just needed a woman bold enough to walk right through their front door. I crossed the towering marble lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The young receptionist behind the massive floating desk looked up as I approached. He couldn't have been older than 25. "Good morning," I cooed softly. "Good morning." His smile was warm, professional. "How may I help you today?" "My name is Cherry Barnes," I said, leaning lightly against the sleek counter, resting my designer handbag over my arm. "I'm here to see Mr. So." He immediately began typing on his console. "Do you have an appointment scheduled with his executive secretary?" "No," I offered a small, mysterious smile. "I don't. But he knows exactly who I am." The receptionist's expression remained politely neutral. "I'm afraid Mr. So strictly does not accept unscheduled visitors, Miss Barnes." I let out a light, airy laugh. "I think if you give his office a quick call and tell him I'm downstairs, he'll make an exception." He hesitated, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. "I met him at the hospital benefit last year." I pressed softly, tilting my head. "And we spoke briefly at Eric Matthews and Biddy Carrington's engagement party recently. I'm sure my name will refresh his memory." He studied my outfit, taking in the expensive presentation, before giving a brief nod. "One moment, please." He picked up the sleek, black desk phone. I folded my hands neatly over my purse, taking a slow, steady breath. This was playing out exactly as I had scripted it in my head. Kwang-su would hear my name over the line. He'd remember the charity gala. He'd remember seeing me looking stunning at the engagement party. Perhaps he had even pulled up the lobby's HD security feeds right now to watch me standing here. He'd noticed the effort I had made. Men of his status always noticed a high-effort woman. The receptionist murmured a few quiet words into the receiver, then listened intently for several seconds. His face remained an unreadable mask. Finally, he hung up the phone with a quiet click. "Miss Barnes." "Yes." I smiled brightly. "Someone will be down to escort you in just a moment." A thrill of victory shot straight down my spine. I knew it. Of course he had agreed to see me. A man as powerful as Kwang-su simply hadn't wanted to seem overly eager by inviting me up immediately. Barely 30 seconds later, the private executive elevator chimed, its brass doors sliding smoothly open. A man stepped out into the lobby. He wore a crisp dark charcoal suit, possessed a broad, muscular frame, and had a discreet black earpiece tucked behind one ear. He radiated the cold, dangerous air of high-level private security. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto me with terrifying speed. He approached with quiet, formidable professionalism. "Miss Barnes." "That's me," I said, puffing my chest out slightly, offering my best dazzling smile. "Right this way, please." I couldn't stop the triumphant grin from spreading across my face as I stepped past him. I had been right all along. Kwang-su was intrigued. He had sent his personal, high-level detail down just to retrieve me. I stepped into the private, mirrored elevator, turning around as the heavy doors began to slide shut. I caught one last glimpse of the reception desk fading away. Everything was going smoothly, exactly as planned. All I had to do now was get into his private office, look him in the eye, and remind Kwang-su that he had chosen the wrong woman. The executive suite was even more overwhelming than I'd envisioned. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the sprawling midtown skyline. Dark, heavy oak paneling, polished black marble, sleek minimalist glass. Everything was understated. Everything screamed staggering, unimaginable wealth. It suited him terrifyingly well. The tall security escort gestured toward a low leather seating area. "Mr. So will be with you shortly, Miss Barnes." "Thank you," I said softly, smoothing my pencil skirt as I took a seat, crossing one leg over the other to display my designer heels. He nodded once and left, the heavy door closing with a quiet, vacuum-sealed click. I took a slow, deep breath, my pulse racing in my chest. This was my moment. This was where everything changed. I quickly checked my reflection in the dark, sleeping screen of my phone. Makeup flawless, hair perfectly styled, cream silk blouse sitting just right. Perfect. A door behind the massive desk swung open. Kwang-su stepped into the main office carrying a thin, black tablet. He looked up. Our eyes locked. I immediately offered my best, most alluring, warmth-filled smile. He didn't smile back. Not even a fraction. Instead, his dark eyes remained entirely flat. He walked around his desk and sat down in his high-back leather chair. He set the tablet beside him, folded his hands over the dark wood, and simply waited. There was no greeting. No, welcome to Securinth. No offer of water or coffee. Not even a polite nod. I cleared my throat, forcing a cheerful tone into the quiet room. It's lovely to see you again, Kwang-su. It's been a little while. It has, his deep voice rumbled. Calm. Professional. Completely unreadable. I wasn't entirely sure if you'd remember me after the engagement party. I remember. For some reason. The cold, flat way he said those two words didn't feel like a compliment. I maintained my charming smile anyway, leaning forward slightly. I've actually thought about our brief conversation at the hospital benefit last year, quite a lot. We didn't have a conversation, he corrected smoothly, not a single muscle in his face moving. The smile nearly slipped off my face. Oh, well, I cleared my throat again, feeling a prickle of heat at the back of my neck. You introduced yourself. Briefly. In the VIP lounge. I remember. Again, nothing. No warmth. No curious tilt of his head. No polite opening to allow me to flirt or build rapport. Just a wall of icy, impenetrable authority. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, trying a different angle. I actually came by today because I wanted to present a unique business opportunity to you directly. I see. Kwang-su leaned back into his chair, his dark eyes fixed on mine. Go ahead. Before I could even open my mouth to pitch, a hidden door built into the dark wood paneling behind his desk clicked open. I turned my head instinctively. Nessa stepped out of the hidden room. My stomach violently plummeted into my shoes. She was wearing nothing except a dark charcoal suit jacket, his tailor jacket, hanging loosely past her thighs, leaving her bare legs on full display. Her hair was slightly tousled, her skin flushed with a radiant post-intimacy glow. She looked completely relaxed, entirely unbothered, padding barefoot across his private floor as though she had walked out of that hidden bedroom 1,000 times before. She wasn't embarrassed. She didn't scramble to cover herself. Babe, Nessa murmured softly, looking around the desk, her voice intimate and thick with sleepy warmth. Have you seen my phone anywhere? I think I left it. The transformation in Kwang-su was instant, drastic, and sickening. The icy, formidable CEO completely vanished. His entire face softened, his dark eyes melting into an expression of pure, breathtaking tenderness as he turned to look at her. It's on the marble counter in the bathroom, he said, his deep voice dropping an octave, rich with affection. Right beside your bag. Nessa offered a small, radiant smile. Thank you. Only then did her eyes drift across the desk and land on me sitting in the chair. Oh. A tiny flicker of recognition crossed her face. Cherry. There was zero panic in her voice. No insecurity. No anger. Just calm recognition. Nessa, I rasped out. I hadn't intended for my voice to sound quite so thin and strangled. Nessa looked between Kwang-su and me, gesturing mildly to her outfit. Am I interrupting an executive meeting? Kwang-su immediately shook his head. No. He kept his eyes locked on her, gesturing to the empty space beside his leather chair. Stay, Nessa. I'd like your professional opinion on this. She hesitated slightly. Are you sure? Very sure. He held out his large hand toward her. Without a moment's hesitation, Nessa walked over and placed her hand in his. Kwang-su gently pulled her closer, his strong arm settling possessively around her waist, tucking her bare-legged frame right against the side of his chair. His large hand rested on her hip as if it were the most natural, permanent thing in the world. As though she'd always belonged there. Then, he slowly turned his gaze back to me. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by an absolute, terrifying frost. You have 5 minutes, Miss Barnes, Kwang-su stated flatly. Please. Convince us. Us. The word hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind straight out of my lungs. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I had spent hours in front of my mirror rehearsing coy smiles, lingering eye contact, charming banter, and subtle flirtation. I hadn't prepared a single word of an actual, legitimate corporate business proposal. My voice sounded tiny, pathetically small in the massive, quiet room. I just thought. Silence stretched. Kwang-su waited. Patiently, coldly, without offering a single lifeline. Without filling the suffocating silence to spare my feelings. The seconds ticked by like centuries. Finally, Kwang-su spoke, his voice dry and definitive. You don't have a proposal. It wasn't a question. A humiliating, burning heat flooded up my neck, scorching my face. Slowly, I shook my head, unable to meet his eyes. He gave one brief nod. Then we're finished here. There wasn't an ounce of anger in his tone. No annoyance. No disappointment. Just absolute, cold dismissal, as though a mild inconvenience had naturally concluded itself. He turned his head away from me, cutting off his attention so completely it felt as if I had ceased to exist in the physical room. Nessa, he murmured softly, his thumb tracing a light circle on her hip. She looked down at him, her lips curving into a soft smile. Would you like to get some lunch now? She giggled softly. I thought you'd never ask. I'm starving. I took the liberty of making a reservation at the bistro downtown. You planned lunch ahead of time? I was hoping we'd finish up in here before 1. Nessa laughed, a light, beautiful sound that echoed through the office. I suppose we should call and let them know we're running a little behind schedule. No need, Kwang-su murmured, looking up at her with undisguised adoration. I already arranged for private catering to be delivered directly to the suite. For several agonizing seconds, the two of them simply stared into each other's eyes, sharing a quiet, intimate world that no one else could touch. I sat frozen in my expensive outfit, completely invisible. Kwang-su reached down, pressing a button on his desk console. Tom. Yes, Mr. So? Tom's crisp voice came over the speaker instantly. Would you please show Miss Barnes out? Of course, sir. The heavy office door swung open almost instantly. Tom stood in the doorway, offering a perfectly professional, practiced smile. Right this way, Miss Barnes. Nobody rushed me out. Nobody mocked my outfit. Nobody threw an insult or raised a voice. I had simply been erased. I forced my legs to move, standing up and walking toward the door as steadily as my shaking knees would allow. It wasn't until the private elevator doors slid shut behind me, plunging me into solitary silence, that the brutal truth finally shattered my ego. I hadn't lost Kwang-su to Nessa. There had never been a competition to begin with. I'd spent weeks convincing myself that if Kwang-su just saw me, if he really looked at me young, styled, and gorgeous, he would realize he had chosen the wrong, aging woman. The reality was infinitely worse. He had never been choosing between us at all. Nessa was his entire world, and I was less than a ghost in his hallway. As the elevator plunged toward the lobby, one final thought burned into my mind with crystal clarity. I had never stood a chance. The private suite felt strangely, blissfully peaceful again. Almost as though Cherry had never crossed the threshold of his corporate tower. Catering had arrived while we'd been dealing with her. Neither of us had bothered moving back out into his sprawling executive office. Instead, we sat across from each other at the small marble dining table tucked right beside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The spread was far more elaborate than either of us could ever finish. Gourmet salmon, fresh greens, sparkling water, and warm artisan bread. I leaned back against my plush chair, still wearing his dark suit jacket, watching him across the table. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. Can I ask you something? You usually do, Kwang-su murmured, cutting effortlessly into his lunch. A soft smile touched my lips. How can you be so utterly vicious? I paused, tilting my head. And yet so gentle? One corner of his sharp mouth lifted in a rare, handsome half-smile. I wasn't aware I had been vicious. Oh please, I laughed softly. You practically annihilated a woman's entire self-esteem without once raising your voice. I did. You somehow managed to be flawlessly polite, and absolutely, terrifyingly ruthless at the exact same time. He considered my assessment for a quiet second, taking a sip of water. I merely concluded an unnecessary meeting. A breathless laugh escaped me. You are completely impossible. So I've been told. I picked up my fork, staring down at my plate before glancing up at him through my lashes. I feel terrible for even admitting this out loud. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine. But you have to admit. Watching her face drop like that was a little bit fun. His dark eyebrow lifted slightly. A little. I gave up trying to play the humble, forgiving woman. Fine? I laughed, shaking my head. It was immensely fun. Watching her realize she was completely invisible to you was pure satisfaction. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, a subtle glint of quiet amusement in his gaze. I suspected as much. I took another bite, chewing thoughtfully as a fresh realization clicked in my head. Actually, how long has she been trying to contact you? Kwang-su met my gaze directly. A few weeks. I blinked, setting my fork down. A few weeks? You never mentioned a single word about it. He shrugged lightly, his posture completely relaxed. What would mentioning it have achieved? I don't know, I murmured. It was happening. I had zero intention of entertaining her nonsense. He said simply, his tone completely flat. So, there was nothing worth discussing with you. It was such a quintessential Kwang-su response. A problem presented itself in his orbit. He evaluated it, determined it held zero value, dealt with it with extreme efficiency, and closed the file. No dramatic declarations. No ego trip. No reason to burden me with irrelevant noise. Half an hour later, Kwang-su pushed his napkin onto the table and stood up, adjusting his cuffs. I should return to work. I smiled up at him. I suppose someone around here has to manage a multi-billion-dollar firm. I've heard the CEO is very demanding. I can fully believe it. He leaned down over my chair, his hand sliding behind my neck, pressing a soft, warm kiss to the top of my head. He lingered there for a brief, reassuring second before stepping away and disappearing back into his primary office, leaving the thick connecting wall slightly ajar. I stayed right where I was, leaning back in the quiet luxury of the suite, slowly finishing my coffee while enjoying the city view. A moment later, a firm knock echoed from his main office. Come in, Kwang-su's voice called out. Devoid of the softness he used when speaking to me, replaced by his flat, commanding executive tone. Tom's crisp voice greeted him. Apologies for interrupting, sir. I just need your authorization on the Q3 risk assessments. I smiled to myself, taking another sip of coffee. Work mode. Heavy paper rustled across his desk. A pen clicked with sharp precision. Then, Tom. Yes, sir. Who was covering the main lobby reception desk this morning? There was a brief, hesitant pause on Tom's end. Ethan, sir. I see. Another heavy, suffocating silence settled over the main office. Even through the cracked door, the air in the suite suddenly felt noticeable colder. Please let Ethan know he will not be covering reception for this firm again, Kwang-su stated smoothly. Tom hesitated. Sir? I left very explicit, unmistakable instructions regarding visitor access, Kwang-su continued, his voice terrifyingly calm. I stated that if Miss Cherry Barnes contacted this building, I was unavailable for the next 100 years. She should never have been processed, given elevator clearance, or announced. Tom cleared his throat softly. I understand, sir. I will reassign him immediately. And who is currently serving as Deputy Head of Corporate Services? Rachel Hughes. Please notify Miss Hughes that she is being promoted to Head of Corporate Services, effective immediately. A much longer pause followed. I wasn't expecting that directive, sir. She followed my exact protocols when Miss Barnes reached out weeks ago, Kwang-su said, his tone devoid of passion or anger. The rest of the department failed to maintain standard procedure. It is the sole responsibility of leadership to ensure clear mandates are communicated, respected, and strictly enforced. If leadership fails to maintain control, leadership is replaced. Understood? Yes, sir. Absolutely. And Tom? Yes, Mr. So? The next time I issue a specific security instruction regarding access to my floor. Kwang-su paused, the silence stretching taut and dangerous. I expect it to be executed. Without exception. Understood, sir. It will not happen again. The main office fell completely silent as Tom quietly gathered the files and exited, the heavy double doors sealing shut. A strange, delicious chill crept across my skin, a shiver running straight down my spine. Not because he had raised his voice. He hadn't raised it by a single decibel. Not because he had yelled, slammed a desk, or made wild threats. He hadn't. It was the absolute, unyielding certainty in his tone. The cold, quiet finality of a man completely in command of his world. There was no hot anger in his decisions. No emotional performance. Just decision. I'd spent the last 3 months falling in love with the gentleman who made me breakfast every morning, who remembered exactly how much oat milk I liked in my tea, who held my waist in his sleep, who kissed my surgical scar as if it were sacred ground. And I had just listened to the formidable, terrifying titan who commanded a global security empire. Sitting there in his oversized suit jacket, clutching my warm mug, a profound realization washed over me for the very first time. They weren't two different men. They were the exact same man. The cold, unyielding wall he put up to control the rest of the world was the exact same strength he used to keep me completely, utterly safe. And somehow, that was both immensely comforting and intoxicatingly thrilling. 5 years. Long enough for a boy to become a man. Long enough for the world to forget your name. The prison gates closed behind me with a heavy metallic clang. I took a slow breath. Freedom. Across the road, a black SUV waited. Leaning against it was the only person who mattered. Teddy. My son. He looked older. Harder. There was something in his face that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I smiled. He didn't. That told me everything I needed to know. I walked over. He hugged me first. Briefly, then stepped back. You all right? He nodded. Yeah. He wasn't. A father knows. I looked him over. No obvious injuries. Expensive watch. Nice suit. He'd done all right for himself. But his eyes. Those weren't the eyes of the boy I'd left behind. Those were the cold, haunted eyes of a man who had stared into an abyss and barely made it out alive. Someone had carved that look into him while I was locked in a cell. Someone had broken him and taught him how to bleed. What happened, Teddy? I asked softly, my voice cutting through the hum of the engine. He looked away, his jaw clenching as he stared out at the barren highway stretching into the distance. Finally, he looked back at me. It's a long story, Pop. I opened the passenger door of the luxury SUV, tossing my duffel bag into the back. It usually is, I murmured, climbing into the plush leather interior. Teddy rounded the front, pulled open the driver's side door, and slid inside. The door shut with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the outside world. He shifted into drive, pulled off the gravel, and accelerated down the open highway. Neither of us spoke for the first few miles. The landscape blurred past, pine trees and gray asphalt replacing the high walls of the prison in the rearview mirror. After a minute, I turned to my seat, resting my arm on the console, and locked my eyes on my son. Start from the beginning, I said quietly, my old authority slipping naturally back into place. Tell me everything.